The opinions expressed in the following program are not necessarily those of Eastlink Community TV, its sponsors, or partners.
Black Films That Teach is proudly sponsored by TD, working together to support change, nurture progress, and contribute to making the world a better, more inclusive place.
Welcome back to Black Films That Teach. I'm your host, Morgan Jessam, and I'm excited for this week's episode because I am in studio with a guest. We are going to be watching Her Wisdom in Black, the Black Loyalists, and I am joined now by Alacia Shevikova. Alacia, we went to NSCC together. Very glad that we could be here in person in the workforce to discuss your films, your several films that you've produced. So can you tell us what this series is about, the Her Wisdom in Black series?
Her Wisdom in Black came together because I wanted voices of Black women in the community to be heard. Mm-hmm. And actually the idea came long before the 2020, and it was in development for a little long, but finally it came together. And why Her Wisdom in Black? Because I find that out of struggle and out of having to put up and fight for so many things comes real wisdom. And I wanted people to hear these voices.
So we're going to be watching the Black Loyalists. Can you tell me how you came up with the three different concepts?
Probably traveling around Nova Scotia. And the Black Loyalists, what struck me as an immigrant, you know, you always learn about your new home. And when we were in Shelburne, I learned that this was the first biggest free village or town of the freed Blacks in North America. Mm-hmm. So it has a significant meaning not only for Canada, but for the North America and for the world, because this was one of the biggest fights for freedom. And they were there, they came, they won. Right? And no one knows it's a little town. Birchtown was a little museum. Now it's a beautiful, newer museum, right? But no one really knows about that. And when you start reading the story of the Loyalists, and for sure intervened was the story of slavery and the story of slavery in Canada and in the Atlantic Canada that people don't know. They ask, there were slaves in Atlantic Canada? When you start learning about that, you understand that there are so many things we don't know that we should.
Mm-hmm. And what do you hope that people take away from this particular entry, the Black Loyalists one?
I hope that people will want to know more, and then they will go and research, and maybe they will want to visit this little town of Shelburne and Birchtown, and understand that, you know, our knowledge of history has gaps, and it's our responsibility to fill these gaps.
Absolutely, I love that. Well, Alacia, we are going to watch the film and then we're going to come back and finish our chit-chat. So we're going to watch Her Wisdom in Black, the Black Loyalists, after this break.
My name is Vanessa Hartley. I'm 21 years old. I was born and raised in Shelburne, Nova Scotia, and I am an 8th generation Black Loyalist descendant. Knowing what I know now, I think that it's really important to connect back to your ancestral roots. Growing up, I had no idea that I was tied to the Black Loyalists. I just knew that I was Black. So it becomes very powerful and overwhelming feeling when you know you come from such a great line of resilience and strength.
I was born to the Fells family in Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, which is a very, very large family. When I grew up, the only heritage that I knew is that I was Black. That was it. I didn't know very much else. And then years later, when I worked at the Black Loyalist Heritage Center and Society, when I started researching my own Black history and family, I found out that my family were descendants of Black Loyalists. It gives me a connection with who my family is and my history is. One of the hardest things, I think, for people who are of African ancestry is that we have a very hard time trying to find and make a connection with who we are, because the enslavement of our ancestors disrupted our own history. And so we don't have that connection with ourselves. And finding that history gives you a sense of self. It also gives you a sense of self-determination. I know who I am, therefore I know what I can be.
My name is Louise DeLille, and I was born here in this house in Shelburne, Nova Scotia. I'm very proud to be a descendant of those people who were the first freed blacks.
When the Black Loyalists arrived after the American War of Independence, we know that there's a significant number of Africans who fought, people of African descent, who fought on the side of the British when promised freedom by the British. So a lot of them were people who escaped from slavery and served with the British. And about 3,500, more than 3,500, end up coming to Nova Scotia in the early 1780s.
They found that, unfortunately, that oppression still followed with them, and they found that there were broken promises on the part of the British government. They found that they were still going to have second-class citizenship because, when they got to Birchtown, which is where one of the largest settlements was, they found that the store owners and business people in Shelburne would hire them to work and pay them less than they would have to pay white people.
It's really hard to believe that one group of God's children could enslave another because of the color of their skin. But we had faith. Faith that God would bring us out of this hell. But it was a kind of faith that you can't put in words. A faith that's got to come from inside. We had faith that God would take us from this hell. And lo and behold, there he was, right in amongst us. Old Nat Turner. Well, Nat Turner was a slave himself. Nat Turner led a revolution that put us all on the road to freedom. That was a hard time. I remember people screaming, the women screaming, children crying, and the men being whipped. Why, some of them was whipped to death. No easy thing to get this freedom. But we managed. Some 3,500 of us. We landed here in Birchtown with nothing but rocks, and they gave us nothing. No food, no blankets. You have not heard anything until you heard your child cry from hunger. Starving we was, living in holes in the ground. We were so hungry, we even ate our dogs. While the soldiers, they was upset. They came, they was gonna kill us because they said we took the food off their table because we was working for nothing. We had to eat. So many of us left, and my husband was one of them. But I stayed, and I got me a job, or jobs. I was a cook, a cleaner, a babysitter, and a hairdresser. I would gather up food, scraps from the tables, and bring it home to them that couldn't make it, the sick and the old. Sometimes it'd be nearly 300 of us walking through the woods in the dark, making our way home from working all day for food. But there'd always be a fire. Those left home, couldn't go to town, would make a huge fire, and we'd sit beside that fire and we'd sing and laugh, and the fiddler would play. And you know what? We was happy. Happy because we was free. But, you know, this was no promised land. And you know, us black women, we got a spirit about us. We have spirits going through us all the time.
In July of 1784, the disbanded soldiers in Shelburne had problems finding employment. So they basically figured that the black loyalists were taking all of the jobs around the township of Shelburne, thinking that they would rise up against the free blacks of Shelburne, destroying 20 of their homes and forcing the majority of the free blacks of Shelburne to relocate out here to Birchtown, which is around 10 kilometers west. Doing so, they figured that they would run them out and basically take the jobs from underneath of them. So it was actually considered the very first black and white race riot in North American history.
Sadly, the story of the Black Loyalists is that they were technically left for dead by the British, but they persevered and they survived.
What I've heard from living about how the Loyalists lived and the hardships that they had, I see parallels to the 50s when I was a child, in the 60s, and the hardships, the racism and the discrimination. People are aware of it. They talk more about it now. But in all reality, I don't think it's changed.
So we could say, well, these are specific experiences to black loyalists and black refugees. But the ideas that allow people to treat people of African descent in such ways in Nova Scotia are deeply rooted in slavery itself. And there are scholars, for example, like James Walker, who argues, right, that slavery itself created the idea of race in Nova Scotia. Okay? What he means by that, I mean, it existed before. What he means by that is it established, right, clearly that black people would be separate from the body politic.
The only thing that's changed is that younger people have gone on and got an education and have decided we're not taking this anymore. We're not putting up with racism and discrimination in our community, outside of our community. We are as good as you are, and we don't need to do that. We don't need to live that way anymore. Whereas my parents were reluctant to talk because if they did, there were repercussions. And the same thing as the black loyalists when they came, there were repercussions. They worked for food. The generation before me worked for food and whatever they could get to survive.
Going on Ancestry and doing the information and looking at the pictures and the databases that folks had already put together, it was very overwhelming, but it was almost like a reassurance of, okay, this is who I am, this is where we come from, and this is our story. It meant that everything I continued to fight for was relevant in terms of racism experiences during our childhood. I have two younger brothers and they have encountered it as well.
The bullying that went on was very much based in race. A lot of comments about looks, about hair. When I was made aware of this divide was within the first week of being in public school. You know, teachers made comments about my hair, about my family themselves. You know, teachers made comments as if, you know, we were smart enough to be in the class. So you were made aware of who you were very, very quickly.
The thing that sticks most in my mind, I think it was grade 7. Other people in my class going to a dance. I was allowed to go, but those friends, those kind of friendships that I was making, I was excluded in that kind of atmosphere from them. I had to stay on this side of the gymnasium while they were on the other side doing their things. And the blacks were gathered in one spot. And when I come home, and my mother said, well, how was it? I remember that. And I said, I didn't like it. She said, that's how it is. That's what she said. That's how it's always been, and it's not going to change. But that's what they thought then, right? That's how they got through.
The worst experience from a youth perspective was when children urinated on my brother's clothes at the high school because he was black. In my younger years, I dealt with it with aggression, which is very different to the way I approach those situations now. But being so young and not understanding and not having those conversations, I didn't know what to do. You can feel very lost and hopeless.
I mean, one of the ways that I coped is that I hid my hair. You know, I stopped wearing it natural. Shortly after attending public school, I changed it so that I could try and fit in with everyone else. And so it was kind of wanting to be a wallflower where you would just fade into the background because that would stop, you know, that racial bullying from happening. Didn't necessarily work. And so you become quiet and you have what I would call internalized racism, where you hate those aspects of yourself that show you and remind you every day that you're black.
Self-identity is so important because it can become internalized racism that you experience. So I know from a very young age, I always wanted to straighten my hair, and my parents were very against that. There was little things that you know, outlined my African Nova Scotian features that I didn't want to embrace.
Well, just being called the N-word, I really want to say it, but I'm not gonna. I've said it once in maybe 40 years, and I said it to get a point across because they weren't getting it. But just the N-word and what that means to somebody who is saying it to you. How do you fight? How do you deal and fight with somebody who is ignorant and the fact that you are no different than they are, but they want to make you feel that you are because they are inferior? With that being said, racism is the only way that people with that mindset can make you feel inferior. That's the only way they can. That's the only power they have over African Nova Scotians or blacks, when you let them have that power. That happened to me. It's happened to me more than once that I was called out of my name, as they say. And it hurt. It was a kind of stinging, bitter rage. It like it wells up in you like a sea, and you have no release for it.
Coping is one of the toughest things. It creates, you know, I guess all of this racialized bullying creates this shame, which the best way for myself, as well as I would say, you know, many students who feel like they're racialized to cope, is to deny who they are. And part of that comes from not seeing themselves within the classroom. And so because they feel like they're not accepted and their history and their culture is not celebrated, for them it's easier to cope by hiding their true selves.
I found high school curriculum not to reflect me at all. I took African Canadian history and I learned about ancient Africa, and I think we watched Kunta Kinte and Roots. Like, we didn't really explore the uniqueness of Shelburne, although that's where I got my education. We have so many resources, and we have our museum here, and we're living on the first place of the settlement of free blacks outside of Africa, the large settlement. And yet we're not learning about that or connecting that back into our family history. So no, I didn't find that it ever reflected me. And I think that if I would have known who I was in high school or had that journey within the curriculum, I think that self-identity would have been fostered a lot quicker. And having confidence in who I am as a black woman would have been there.
My most painful experience would have been grade 8. In history class, we were learning about Nova Scotian history and Canadian history. And there was this one paragraph that referenced African Canadians in the textbook. And the only thing that it said were black people were slaves. And that was it.
Children today need to know who they are, what their culture is. As African Nova Scotians, that stuff has been lost. A lot of our culture has been lost. We weren't allowed to practice things because we were slaves. Some of it come through. But children need to know that we are as unique as every other culture. We do have culture, even though it's not taught. It's not, some of it hasn't been passed on. Now people are starting to realize, yeah, we need to know this stuff, and our children need to know this stuff to be better human beings.
I'm the chair for SEED, so I work closely with Louise, and she has been such a role model and a huge part of my life in helping me with this. I'm an activist. I doesn't call myself an activist. I sound like Louise. She said, Vanessa, people keep calling me an activist, but I don't think I'm an activist. Do you think I'm an activist? I'm like, hello, you are the activist.
I know, people call me an activist. And I may do things that an activist does, but I'm just somebody who cares. That's who I am. I'm not an activist. I'm somebody who cares about the people around me. I care about the world I live in. I care about my family, my friends, and my community. My life has not been okay until I decided that I was going to stand up and I was going to fight, because I have just as much right to be treated the same way as somebody who figures that they're elite is treated. When it comes to my rights, when it comes to my family, when it comes to my neighbors and my community. I have just as much right to clean water as they do. And if I have to fight until the day I die, and no matter what I have to do, I will see that my community has clean water, because water's life.
Environmental racism is the disproportionate placement of a toxic landfill or waste facility that is then a burden on people of color communities. So in Shelburne, it looks like placing a landfill in the back of the South End, which is a black community.
We lived through a time when nobody cared that we were what we were breathing. Not us, because whenever people got together, the topic of the conversation was always about that dump. So we talked about it amongst ourselves, but nobody wanted to hear it. And people started to die from issues around that environmental racism, and nobody helped us. We put together a map of this community, a certain area in this community, and in relation to the dump and where our homes are and homes were. And on that map, it shows red dots, and each one of those red dots are somebody who's died of cancer.
We have to work again as a collective, and it's not just about I as an individual, it's about we as a collective and we as a group of people. And that is going to be the best way that we can address our issues and work towards a common goal, which is ending and dismantling systemic racism.
I feel like our community is really great in terms of banding together and being there for folks. I think the Black community suffers in silence a little bit. I know myself, it's hard to ask for help or to receive help. So, you know, I don't know how people are doing. I think that it's a difficult conversation. And in having that conversation, for some reason, there's always that racism aspect.
To be a Black woman feels like to be living a never-ending struggle of some kind. That's a hard thing to put in words. It's a very emotional thing for me because I am trying to be the best person I can be for younger Black women coming on.
To move through a predominantly white world as a Black woman can be exhausting at times because, and I think many people would say this, you always feel like you have to wear a mask and you almost have to shield parts of yourself so that you will be accepted in those white spaces.
I think I am a very strong, fierce Black woman that sometimes gets the angry woman Black stereotype, but that's okay because it's necessary. I enjoy doing what I do, and I am not going to stop advocating until I feel that my needs are met in terms of this community.
My words of wisdom is, this world is changing. This world has changed. They need to think not just of themselves, but everybody, because we won't survive if we don't stop all this foolishness and come together as human beings and save the world we're living in. We need to be able to work together. We need to be able to live together and look after one another. They need to have the strength to put aside the want of power for themselves and think of everybody.
Welcome back to Black Films That Teach. I'm Morgan Jessam, and I'm once again joined by Olesia Shevikova, and we have just watched Her Wisdom in Black, The Black Loyalists. Can you tell me how you got involved with this project?
My good friend, who was one of my first friends in Nova Scotia, her name is Wendy Wilson, and she's an artist and an educator, and she's very active in the African Nova Scotian community. She decided to take it as her pride to educate me about the history of African Nova Scotians, right? So, and we really had long coffees and talks about all the things that they don't teach you in school or in, you know, even the news and everything. So, and she actually asked me, I did a film about the Indigenous community, and she told me, hey, you have to make one for us.
Yep.
And then it came together.
Excellent.
Over a coffee break.
Yes, of course. That's how all great ideas come about. So I imagine there was a lot of learning and discovering during this one. What stands out to you the most that you learned during the process of making this particular part?
Many things. One thing that really shocks me, and I cannot explain or I cannot understand, is the Birchtown, the city of Shelburne, the south end where the black community is, still does not have clean water. There's a documentary on Netflix that is, so many awards by Elliot Page, and Elliot Page agreed to pay for the well. But just a few months ago, the city of Shelburne told it's not feasible. For sure it's not feasible to have clean water for black community. Why would it be? So that's the most thing that, and I am not going to leave it like that, because if we just leave it and walk by, because when you meet Louise in the film, and when she talks about it, and she tells that until I'm alive, I'm going to fight, how can you not help, right?
I mean, clean water, I heard, is pretty important to live. So hopefully they get their clean water. One thing that I also found really, that I related with, was the lack of education, our own stories. I believe it was Vanessa who talked about when she was in school, they learned about, slavery, but not a lot about our Canadian history. What are some things that educators can do to improve that?
They should start seeing the world in a different lens. They should start to understand what the white privilege is. And they should start to understand what does it mean to be colorblind. Because there are so many decisions on so many levels of the government that are really colorblind. And also everywhere in education, right? The people who write those books, they really have to stop being colorblind.
One thing I felt through this film was the passion that people have from Shelburne and Birchtown. Did you feel some of that while making this documentary?
They're fighting for their community. And what I understand in the and I've lived in Africa for a long time, and the Afrocentric view is not about me, it's about the community. And when the community is in danger, is in grief, is in any kind of uncomfortable situation, everyone is passionate to change it.
So we spoke a little bit about this before the camera started rolling, internalized racism. And another thing that I took away from this film is the pain and that racism has, and then we turn that pain inwards, internalized racism. You had a story about your own son. Do you mind sharing that?
Yeah, I'm a mother of a mixed race kids. One is 14, almost 15, and another is 4. And being an immigrant, you come to this place hopeful for freedom and equality, because that's how we see Canada from the outside, from the other side of the big pond, right? And this is what we came from 2 revolutions and from the social unrests, and just looking for peace and safe. And then when my little boy, going to public school, came in grade 4 and told Mom, I want to be white, I didn't understand. I really didn't understand. I didn't know why he wanted. I was like, why? You're beautiful. I want to change my name, I want to straighten my hair, I just want to be white. And for many years, he came to his own. He takes pride in what he is. And I guess it's a lot of work between me and my husband. But at that time, no. And I didn't understand it until I was making the film. When these beautiful women, they were telling this to me, sometimes I couldn't speak because I could relate my own experience so much to them. Because my little boy, he was just hating all the aspects that other people thought that, he deserves less because he has this and this and that.
I mean, all the women were telling stories about their race's experience during the film. I mean, Vanessa's probably my age, and her brother was, urinated on at school, and I'm sure he's younger than me. So these are issues that we need to fix that have been long-standing. Well, Alacia, I really enjoyed this one, and thank you so much for sharing this documentary with us. And I appreciate that you experienced this you know, with your son, and that you are able to relate to the story. So thank you so much for being here. It was great to see you again.
My pleasure, Morgan. Thank you.
Okay. We've been watching Black Films That Teach. I'm your host, Morgan Jessam. Thank you for watching. See you next week.
Black Films That Teach on Eastlink is sponsored by TD, working together for a more inclusive tomorrow.